Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, did you know there's a skill many men never learn that ends up seriously limiting your professional success and satisfaction in your love and sex life? I put together a free guide to explain this unknown skill and give you exactly what you need to use it today. Get it by heading over to ShanaJamesCoaching.com or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. That's 44144. You'll also get access to Man Alive outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm thrilled today to have Arjuna Ardagh here today. Welcome, Arjuna.
Thank you.
And we're going to be talking about brilliance and how to create more brilliance or step into more brilliance into your life, in your life, what keeps you from being brilliant. I really love the way you are talking about and framing this concept of radical brilliance. It's similar to the way I sometimes think about life, that people, very few people I feel like step into a kind of extraordinary life or risk in a way what it takes to, be really connected, really fulfilled, to be really alive and vital and not settle. So thank you for, coming up with or channeling or whatever you want to say, this concept of brilliance that we're going to talk about.
Well, it's good that it's actually interesting that you stumbled on that a little bit, like, come up with channel, because actually it really was like that. This was something that was given to me to look after more than any kind of doing. And actually It's a funny thing, because that's what the book's also about,
right.
is how to step out of the way. And, so it's appropriate to
talk about it that way.
Yeah, and to not quite know how to express it, because it's not really a doing; it's more of a non-doing.
Yes. Okay.
That's
I want to dive into that, and for people who haven't heard of you yet, let me just give you a quick introduction. But that's a really great place to start, actually.
Yeah.
So Arjuna is a radical brilliance coach and a writer and public speaker. And he's written 9 books, including a bestseller called The Translucent Revolution. He's the author of Better Than Sex, Conscious Men, which he co-authored with John Gray, and the most recent book, Radical Brilliance. He's been a speaker at conferences worldwide, including a talk at the United Nations, and then all the way on the other end, or I don't know if it's the other end, but Google.
Yeah.
Google and the United Nations seem to kind of frame the range. And he's also appeared on TV, radio, and print media, and lives with his wife, Chamali, in California. So thank you again for being here.
My pleasure.
And let's dive into that. Well, I want to give you the choice. We could dive a little more into the fact that the book and what I just said, right, is it's kind of about not a doing, but a channeling. Or you could start by telling us about, how do you define radical brilliance? What is it to you?
Yeah. Well, what I mean by brilliance is when you think things that have never been thought before, which causes you to say things that have never been said before and to take action that has never been taken before, but in a way that is aligned with the evolution of humanity. Okay?
I like that.
So, you could say blah, 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 blah. Maybe that's never been said before, but it's not right. But it's not particularly aligned with the evolution of humanity. But so, for example, when Albert Einstein was laying in the bathtub, just soaking and relaxing, and the general theory of relativity revealed itself to him, this was not a doing. He was relaxing, and something presented itself to him, which moved everything forward, and Steve Jobs also, for all his possible failings as a in his relationships, Steve Jobs is a really good example of brilliance, that he would be taken over by this kind of creative force that is both universal but needs individuality to express
Right.
itself. And I believe that we are, all of us, candidates to be taken over by the evolutionary force in that way.
Mm. I like hearing it that way. It makes sense, right? It's like, it does seem to me when I'm creating, or when the things in my life that have happened that have felt the most aligned or the most fulfilling, that I haven't actually done them per se, right? It's like they've been happening, and I've taken action, or I've visioned or something, right? But I mean, it does call into question, which I think you speak to this in the book too, the very nature of human existence. And, when we do have these thoughts, where do they come from? And
yeah. Well, I've done a lot of research in my life. Like, many of the books I've written have been about ultimate fulfillment. Like, what does it take to live a life of undiluted inspiration and energy, and where you have no regret, and you feel completely, you know that you're living the life you were born to live.
Well
And
said.
some people attribute that to, finding the right partner. That would be a relationship goal. Or making enough money. That would be a financial goal. Some people attribute it to spiritual states. So the purpose of life is to become enlightened, for example. However, and this is what the beginning of the book is really, the first chapter of the book is about this, that none of those formulas really stand up to investigation. But there is something, on the other hand, although all these formulas kind of fall apart, there is something that people drop into, where people do have undiluted kind of fulfillment. And it really has to do with a very, very, very deep, fundamental, you could say, misunderstanding about what it means to be alive. That the whole group think, including advertising and education and everything, the whole group think is really about acquisition. How can I get more for me while I'm here? Or how can I avoid pain for me? But actually, if we reverse engineer it, extremely fulfilled people are not really preoccupied with how can I get more for me.
Right.
Extremely fulfilled people are preoccupied with the contribution they can make.
Yes.
And it's a strange thing that when you actually give up trying to get anything for yourself and allow yourself to be available for contribution, that's when you actually get the greatest fulfillment.
Yes. Well, and I highlighted there's a line in your book where you say, or you write, the irreversible, deep, abiding recognition that you are not actually here on planet Earth to get something for yourself, but you're here to give a gift that flows uniquely through you. And when you discover that gift and make it central to your life, everything else falls into place.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Seems to be statistically true. If you go find people who are incredibly happy and who have lots of energy into their 80s and, have little health blips, but nothing serious, their lives are really consumed by a passion to contribute. And a really good example of this is Barbara Marx Hubbard, who is now 87.
Yes.
Still traveling internationally and just on fire, because nothing stops her. She has a vision of the evolutionary possibility for humanity, and she's driven by that. She keeps going, and you can find so many examples like this. I was just seeing a video with Jane Goodall, who's I think in her 80s.
Brilliant woman, yeah.
So once you discover that you are here to steward and deliver a certain aspect of evolution, everything else just falls in place quite magically.
So, okay. And I know you have processes, but the first question that comes to mind, especially when I'm imagining being a man listening to this podcast, right, is, well, how do you find that, right? If each of us has this unique flow or this unique contribution, how do you start to find what that is?
Well, I don't think that's actually quite the right way to go about it, because the part of us that wants to find, how do I find, that is really not the part of us that is most available to what we're
Yes,
talking about.
that makes sense.
So actually the book describes a cycle, and when all the components of the cycle are activated in a human life, I would say brilliance is the inevitable byproduct. So let's just go back for a minute to thinking about Albert Einstein.
I love this. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. I just want to say, because the cycle, in reading the cycle, it makes a lot of sense and it's very powerful. And then it does take it out of that realm of the person I think myself to be needs to find or come up with something, right? So I'm excited for you to talk about this process too.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay. Well, let's just go for the cycle then. So the cycle is like a clock, you know. So when you look at a clock, it's got 12 at the top, and then as you go around, it goes 3, 6, 9. So the top of the cycle is what we could call moments of awakening. And this means moments when you really transcend the mind and you have a direct experience of consciousness without boundaries or infinity. And this has traditionally been the domain of organized spirituality, or not necessarily organized, but the domain of mysticism. So if you want to know about consciousness without boundaries, we need to look into mystical traditions, spiritual traditions, right?
Yes.
But if you get stuck there and your life is only about that, you don't get the rest of the cycle. So if you hang out in 12 o'clock in this kind of spaciousness, and you don't have any agenda to stay there nor to avoid it, what happens is there's a natural tremoring starts to occur. It's a kind of it begins as the faintest impulses of inspiration, and actually the easiest way to access it is in the body, you know. And sexual energy is a really good analogy for this, or maybe an expression of it. That everybody knows what it's like to get sexually aroused. So at the beginning, it's just a kind of feeling good, you know. Before it's like really intense in the genitals, there's just this kind of a feeling we're alive,
feeling or aliveness.
Exactly. And then that can actually, if it concentrates, that can become sexual arousal. So in the same way, brilliance begins as just this. It often begins as a sensation in the body, a localized pocket of pleasure somewhere, which we experience physically because it's not a mental thing. And as it builds and grows, it takes you over. So by the time we get around to 3 o'clock, it has become creative flow. This looks very different from spirituality at 12. So now creative flow means the artist is up all night painting, the musician is taken over by, you know, jamming, the
writer's writing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Or the innovator is inventing new products. You know, the entrepreneur is building a business. So there's many ways this can happen. So that's 3 o'clock creative flow.
I like too that you just added to the entrepreneur and the, that it doesn't have to just be what some people would consider art.
No,
it's creative impulse, creative.
Definitely not. It could be social and political action, you see.
Great.
Yeah. So as it continues now from 3 to 6, because 3 o'clock is all about creative flow, but it doesn't actually create tangible results unless it gets grounded in the physical world. So right after 3, you could say like 3:15 is what we call intention. So that's when you start to set intentions. I'm going to complete this by this date. And then the whole movement from 3 to 6 is the actualization of intention, which requires now moving into boundaries, you know. Right. So we're
taking actions.
Yeah. So now you've got budgets and timelines and agreements and contracts, and everything becomes constrained to be able to produce results. So by the time you get to 6 o'clock, we're no longer in the field of creative flow. We're in the field called accomplishment, achievement, productivity, you see?
Right, which is very polar from the 12 o'clock.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes sense that they would be 6 and 12.
That's the nature of the cycle, is wherever you are on the cycle, you can look across the cycle and you'll see exactly the opposite is true.
Yes.
Yeah. So wherever you are, you're polarized. Yeah. So you're immersed in one kind of activity, and you're completely polarized from the opposite kind of activity. So now, but if you stay in 6 very long, accomplishment, achievement, and productivity, it actually is inherently stressful, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
This is
I mean, that's where many people in our culture live, I would think, right? In the corporate world. And
yeah. Well, there's a phenomenon we talk about in the book called looping, where you get caught in a particular phase of the cycle and you just go round and round and round.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of people get caught in looping of productivity, begin to rest. Oh, got to do more, begin to rest. So you hardly unwind before you go back into
Right. It's like I'll think about resting and then all the other, I have to go do.
You can loop anywhere in the cycle. You can get caught anywhere. In fact, most people do. So 6 o'clock, there's a kind of either a mild or a strong feeling of burnout. And this is partly to do with choice, because 6 o'clock requires us to make decisions. Okay? Mm-hmm. You've got to make financial decisions. You've got to make quality decisions. You've got to choose this over that. And so Gregory Bateson was one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century. He wrote the book called Towards an Ecology of Mind. And he coined this term double bind.
Ooh. I'm glad you're going into this too.
Yeah. So Gregory Bateson said it's not just that, if you're lucky, you're successful, and if you're unlucky, you feel failure. He said because of double bind, you are inevitably, sooner or later, you're going to make decisions that you regret.
Right.
And it doesn't matter which decision you make, there's going to be regret. So a good example would be, there's lots of examples.
Well, right. You gave the example of a man in a loveless marriage who there's conflict and yet and bitterness, right. And yet there's 2 young children. And so that if he has the courage to leave the marriage, then he gives up the little ones. And
exactly,
it's like, it seems to me like the older I get, the more these double binds do seem inevitable.
Yeah, they are inevitable. Yeah. And the bigger you play, the bigger arena you play in, the stronger they become. I've just been reading Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, 600 pages. Constant double bind. It's so. A very simple example to understand of double bind is a young person who inherits the family business, which has been running at a loss. Now, there's employees who've been with the company for 25, 30 years. So, do you lay off the employees or some of them to save the company, but then you've disappointed people who've given their lives in loyalty, right. Or do you keep the employees on, let the company run down and disappoint the shareholders? So one way or another, you're going to feel regret. You kind of, there's going to be that feeling of, that you make a decision you don't like. So because this is the nature of 6 o'clock, it is inevitably sooner or later followed by feelings of regret. So 6 to 9 is the field where we experience shame, regret, failure, inadequacy, where we are actually confronted with the limitations of our incarnateness, where we feel like we start to feel I'm more like a drop in the ocean and the whole ocean. Now that's, as you get around to 9, you have humility, learning.
Yes.
That's actually where there's self-forgiveness, self-love, but it's the opposite of 3. We were talking about polarity. 3 o'clock, you thought you could do anything.
Right.
You were in a creative flow, up all night, anything's possible. 9 o'clock, nothing seems possible. You feel inherently small and humble, and all right.
I think I'm going through one of those phases. It was funny, as I was reading it, though, I could see, I'm like, it seems like I'm in multiple phases at a time, but then it made sense the way you described it, which is like each day can be a cycle, and then there can be decades of a cycle or project cycles.
Right.
So that's interesting too, the overlaps.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. And you could be at 3 o'clock in your yearly cycle, but you could be at 9 o'clock in your daily cycle, so because they're cycles within cycles. And then the last phase from 9 to 12 is the return back to awakening. Because if you're at 9 and you're in this feeling of humility and who am I, and I can't, I don't have so much, your attention naturally turns to something bigger than your own mind, because you've lost faith and confidence in your own mind. So you look to something beyond that, and that's where we return to awakening, which could be personalized in a kind of religious way that you hand things over to God, or it could be more impersonal in that you have a rediscovery of your true nature as consciousness.
Right. And this is beautiful. And I know you in the book write about all the different places that people can loop or get stuck. And it seems like in looking at going from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, especially people who maybe don't identify as spiritual or religious, or kind of haven't had that orientation, or who get stuck in this sense of, well, maybe nothing really is possible, or that kind of pessimistic or skeptical place. Seems like that could be a place where they would get stuck.
Sure. Well, people, when we get stuck in the 9 to 12 phase, it generally is characterized by a belief in some future state of freedom or enlightenment, or liberation or oneness with God. So now it's between 9 and 12. Sorry, I'm not sure I said that earlier correctly, but between 9 and 12 is really it was the language of being on a path, being a seeker on a path, progressing towards some state of resolution.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of someone I know who has been struggling for a really long time, and I'm wondering if this person in a way is kind of stuck in that realm between 9 and 12, can't necessarily...
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be an interesting exploration.
Well, there are several different ways that we get stuck in the cycle. Most people do get stuck somewhere in the cycle, and some people's lives are only just spent looping in a certain part of the cycle.
One area of the cycle, right?
And that that explains really why someone is not brilliant. So you start to get to the point of recognizing brilliance is our inherent natural state. So if you're not expressing brilliance, it's because of inhibition in the cycle. So once we understand this, that your natural state is brilliant, and the brilliance only gets inhibited through these types of blockage, then the next step is to understand that the blockage gets unblocked through practice. Right? And now we can actually create a map of just about any form of self-improvement you can imagine. Anything that anybody ever does as a discipline or a practice fits somewhere into this.
Fits somewhere in the cycle, right? That makes sense.
See? So the practices from 12 to 3 are practices to foster creativity, right? So automatic writing, or any kind of free flow expression. Right. Practicing the violin is a 12 to 3 practice. 3 to 6 practices to do with accountability. So having an accountability partner, making a list of things you're going to do in the morning, having them done by the evening. Any kind of productivity, time management practice is 3 to 6. Yep. 6 to 9 practices are really psychotherapeutic. So those are practices of understanding yourself better, working on your childhood, your inner child, working on your wounds. All of that is 6 to 9. And 9 to 12 practices are what we call spiritual practices. Right. So they're practices to dissolve the identification with individual and coming back to spaciousness. But you can get stuck in any of those places. Right. They all look good, and all of those places in the cycle would theoretically allow for endless exploration.
Yes.
All right.
Well, and I was just going to say, though, this is a brilliant map, which is kind of a pun that I didn't mean to come up with in your way of using brilliance. But, I have to say, these days, as I've been doing more spiritual practice, or as I've been getting older, or as I've become a mom, I'm not sure which it is, but my brain has been a little less able to retain, fine detail. Yeah. And this map of yours sticks like completely in my mind. I completely understand it. It makes sense. It's very simple. And it also, right, it just makes sense with my experience of being a human and being someone who does have a spiritual practice, but also wants to create, and also is into the, going inside and looking and understanding. And it really lays things out in a way that I think helps people and can help people organize what are the practices I need right now. And I'm curious how you would suggest, and again, you can tell me if I'm asking this the wrong way, but how would someone know in general where he or she is in the cycle to even be able to take on the practices?
Well, I'm not a big believer in self-diagnosis. That's the beauty of coaching and peer groups and mentoring situations. That when we get caught somewhere in the cycle, it tends to become an addiction. So let's say that you're caught around 6 o'clock, which is about productivity. What you think you need to do when you're caught in 6 o'clock is just check more things off on boxes. If I could just get all this done, but
Yeah.
that's actually the addiction. When you're caught in 12, you think that the solution is just to meditate more. That's not actually the solution. That's the addiction, you see.
Yeah.
So actually, we're just launching now the Global Brilliance Practice Community, which is where people from all over the world can join this community for $1 a day. And all of the practices are explained on video and audio, guided meditation. So
beautiful.
We've got all these practices laid out. And then people can actually get, they can get support from me.
Yeah.
We have coaches available that people can consult with. They can form pod groups.
Right. And so you're saying, right, because we can tend to get stuck and have blind spots and not even actually really be able to see ourselves in that way.
Exactly.
I was just thinking about a session I was doing with a client yesterday who has been feeling a lot of anxiety and a lot of struggle, and he's been in the do running a company. And, one of the things I pointed out was that he had decided a year and a half or 2 years ago that he wasn't going to take on this role or start this company. And then at some point in between then and now, he'd slid into thinking that he had all of this responsibility and he had to do this. And this was, and then he started getting all ramped up in that kind of 6 o'clock must do. So it was really, it's kind of an interesting example of, me looking from the outside and saying, what if you really oriented your life? You could completely change your life right now. You don't have to be doing the things that you're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. And that's a very, very interesting observation, that depending on where you are in the cycle, you feel obliged to things which from outside that place in the cycle look like choices.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, particularly very productive people who put themselves into situations that require a lot of productivity, it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like something I have to do.
Yes.
And of course, everything is a choice. That's the whole beauty of this is like Disneyland. You can go on any ride you want for as long as you want. There's no rules.
Well, and that's such a concept to really that can be hard, I think I've seen for myself and for others to digest, to suddenly realize as an adult, wow, I can do anything I want to do. I mean, I want to take care of my son. I want to take care of myself. I want to be able to have a roof over my head and have the basics covered. But to really get that we can change our lives, and I think this is a kind of brilliance you're speaking to, such that we actually feel fulfilled and inspired, as opposed to we're just kind of another cog in the wheel, or stressing and struggling to do things that don't seem like choice, and yet they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the most single important how can I say that? The single most important thing that anyone can do is to have at least a period of the day when you completely disengage, not only from activity, but also from your mind and your emotions. So I like to do that early in the morning. I get up I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Just because I love that time when the rest of the world's asleep. You can feel you're kind of sneaking around in a sleeping world. And that time of the morning before the dawn, you can really access consciousness in its unmodified state. Before consciousness becomes thought and feelings, you can access just the nature of consciousness itself. And if you have that punctuation every day, there's much less chance that you're going to get caught up in compulsive addictive behavior.
It makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm really appreciating the depth of your awareness, right? I mean, I do not get up at the 4 o'clock hour. So that's one of the times I really like to be sleeping. But I know when I've been up at that time, right, I think it takes a certain kind of awareness, but we can feel that. the field in a way that people aren't as active, and the thoughts flying around. And when I think about I think a lot of people, especially I just had this flash of corporate America, are walking into an office, walking into a meeting, and there's all these people there, and they're doing and they're thinking. And I think it doesn't necessarily always occur to people that can kind of cloud our field or our consciousness. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
It might seem like a very bizarre, thought to some people.
Right.
But I think the more you do start taking time to be in just that quiet and that presence, the more all of a sudden these things start to seem, or you start to be able to pay attention to them, and suddenly you can feel the difference.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, as the second part of the book is very granular.
Yes.
It's what time do you go to bed? What time are you going to wake up? What are you going to have for breakfast? What are you going to have for lunch? What supplements are you going to take? How often you can have sex? What kind of sex you're going to have? What friendships? It examines everything that I did 420 interviews altogether that influenced the book, all with brilliant people, over a long period of time, over 2 decades. But I really tried to include everything that anyone had mentioned as a factor in brilliance. So it's a fairly complete anatomy of,
and it does. It goes from that realm of spirit and vision and inspiration, as your model also does, into the actions that we take.
Right. Well, some of these things are very significant. Just we were talking about bedtime. So I've worked with executives in from New York or Tokyo or Paris or London, who, particularly New York, they say, people in New York tell me that the restaurants don't even start serving till 9 p.m. I'm telling people to be in bed by 9 p.m. So when I suggest to people to experiment with changing their bedtime, they think I'm crazy. But it's amazing when someone has been in the habit of eating late and then going to bed after midnight, and I support them to gradually bring their bedtime earlier. It's amazing how, as the body resets itself to closer to natural rhythms, the brilliant energy comes back.
Interesting.
These impulses return. Yeah, so the little thing like that. I mean, somebody really wanting to make a difference might not think that what time they go to bed is part of the equation, but it really is. And then there's also supplements that that there's nutrition the brain needs. If the brain is missing certain nutrients, it's not going to behave in its most brilliant version of itself.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for this, and thank you for all
My
of
pleasure.
the research, the conversations, and the practices I know you're doing. What do you feel called to leave men with? This is clearly a taster. It's just the beginning of a dive in.
Yeah. Well, we have a little, if this feels interesting, of course, you can go to Amazon and you can get the book if you'd like to read the whole cycle. And we also have a website, radicalbrilliance.com, where there is a little kind of, you can get a PDF that explains the whole cycle, and see how it applies to you. And I think many people who have explored this, it clicks, like, that explains everything. Suddenly everything falls into place. Including, I did some really interesting research for the book with brain scientists. Really cutting edge brain scientists who they had all the research, but the cycle actually started to explain how different kinds of brain activity relate to each other.
Interesting.
Because the cycle is not only about subjective experience, it's also your brain chemistry is going through changes as you go through the cycle.
Yes.
So it does seem to be, I've been very fortunate to be gifted with this kind of cartography that explains so much of what we are all experiencing anyway.
Yeah. And I would say that really was my experience as I was reading the book. And, even I think I got the first half and then the second half. And So the first half was more the map and the second half was the practices and the more granular piece. But even as I just read the first half, it helped make sense of so much of my own process in life.
Yeah.
And the places I've felt stuck, or, some of the phases I've gone through. Like I've gone through a phase in my business this year around wanting to deepen. I feel like it's been a lot of the 9 o'clock, maybe you might say, if I'm on the wrong number or the wrong time, but it's felt like a big deepening and wanting to clarify what the offer is, but it hasn't necessarily been that creative spark. It's been more the reckoning and sitting with, and kind of felt like a little bit being in the dark, or being in that something's not ready to yet come into form or birth or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's very important, to have the patience.
Oh God.
To let things emerge at their own pace.
Yeah, this has been a little bit grueling in that way, right? And I can see that some phases take longer than others, right? For something to birth in that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure entirely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.